From here, let's go to Europe. There is something huge happening over there, even after the European Court of Justice came up with their verdict, their judgment, concerning the European Super League, the proposed European Super League. Would say the men behind the ESL have returned with an even worse format. But this whole sorry affair is an inevitable product of a broken system. When the prospect of a European Super League resurfaced for the opt-in time in October 2020, former Liverpool defender Jamie Carragher issued a response that was very distinct, as it was heartfelt from him. That plea was always going to fall on deaf ears, as we could see from a result of yesterday's judgment. If the history of football has taught us anything, is that the idea of the Super League will never go away, no matter how much resistance it meets. It is indestructible. It will never die. Why should we say so? The perception of the Europe's elite clubs are almost exclusively run by some greedy, power-hungry men facing serious financial jeopardy and jealous of course, the commercial success of the Premier League and of UEFA. But simply put, Real Madrid and Barcelona need a solution to their cash flow problems, which were laid bare during the pandemic. And the European Super League promises some guaranteed revenue streams and therefore long-term economic security. But what does our guest on In The Game think? Of course, we've got Andrew Oysen joining us all the way from Houston, Texas, a Pan-African football commentator. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us today on In The Game.
Good morning, Onyechi. Pleasure to be on the show.
It's a pleasure to have you. So, Andrew, it's looking like the Super League is back, but with a new format. Now the Super League is back with a new format. We've got no permanent members because we saw a lot of rejection yesterday. Statements coming from here and there from clubs who were earlier listed to be part of the European Super League. An extract from the judgment yesterday reads that smaller teams are now able to play in this new competition with addition of the Blue League. The judgment also, for the previous time, says that the league was closed, but right now it is open. While we see Manchester City, Chelsea, United, among others, rejecting the new format, on the other hand, we have Turkish giants, the likes of, Fenerbahce and all, Marseille, Lyon from the Ligue 1, they are very keen to join this European Super League. The financial solution for the future of this club has managed to convince them that they can get more money if they join up with the ESL. What is likely to play out here, Andrew, with these teams showing interest and the pullout and rejection of Premier League teams and other Spanish teams?
Well, Onyechi, I think the two sides have been very well defined over the last couple of years since the Super League really came in prominently into the discussion. You know, you have people like Florentino Perez, the president of Real Madrid, as well as the president of FC Barcelona, Joan Laporta. They are the major real muscle behind the proposition of the Super League. And their argument is that not enough revenue is really being generated for the clubs who participate in the UEFA Champions League, the various UEFA competitions. But at the same time, on the other side, you have the English Premier League, UEFA, of course, the European Club Association, many organizations who have rejected the premise of a Super League coming into play because it threatens a lot of their financial benefits from these competitions that are already established. And I think this judgment from the European Court of Justice, it does provide some encouragement from the side of the Super League, but at the same time, there's still so many obstacles to go before they can establish this competition. And they really need to win over the hearts and minds of all the European clubs and organizations before they can move forward with this.
All right, you would agree with me, Andrew, that Madrid president Florentino Perez is the greatest president in the history of football, with achievement and the way he has been able to, garner support from the Spanish sides and how Real Madrid is so powerful in Spain. And by the court ruling on Thursday, I think there will be two ways to this. Either the Super League is held or UEFA sits at the table with the Super League clubs and addresses all the problems of the Champions League. whether from a sporting or financial point of view, either way. But what do you think of this, Andrew? Because a lot of fears is for the fact that Florentino Perez is behind this. He's the greatest. There is a possibility that it will, of course, taunt UEFA and their agenda for football. What do you think?
Well, I think this decision that came down from the ECJ really gives the likes of Florentino Perez, some bargaining chips when the negotiations come down for these sorts of things. If the decision came on the side of UEFA, it would completely reject the Super League coming into existence. But this decision is non-binding. It cannot be appealed by UEFA. So, like you said, Florentino Perez, he's the real face behind all of this. He's been the face of this movement. And I think, when the negotiations come down for the European Club Association, if he can gather enough support from the clubs like you previously mentioned, the clubs in France, there's already, the top clubs in Italy, then I think he can get some concessions from UEFA. And UEFA has to consider the proposition of the Super League now, and they have to have a criteria for rejecting it. The manner in which they went about it, that is what this legal decision came against. And so now, like you mentioned, it gives the likes of Perez and Real Madrid and these clubs who are headlining the creation of the Super League, it gives them some real negotiating power.
Okay, let's see the format. Of course, they introduced a new format, and I think this format proposes more matches for players. Obviously, it proposes more. UEFA only guarantees 10, but this format guarantees 14. We're supposed to have it on the screen right now for us to have an understanding of what the format looks like. Now, what are the implications? We can see that 2 teams bottom of the 2 groups in Star League gets relegated and are replaced by the 2 finalists of the Gold League. 2 teams bottom of the Gold League are relegated and replaced by the 2 finalists of the Blue League. 20 out of 32 teams in the Blue League exit the competition and are replaced by 20 new teams based on the performances in their domestic league. Oh, this is more matches. And I see the reason why UEFA are against this, because this is cumbersome according to some teams who have pulled out. What do you think about this format right now?
Well, I think the first proposal of the Super League, it was a small group of elite clubs, and it was easy for the European football and UEFA to reject because they could say that these clubs were out of touch with the interest of the majority of clubs in Europe. But I think this new format that was announced, it's meant to kind of gather support from some of the clubs you mentioned that are coming on board with this proposition, and I think it creates more of a system that's more inclusive for European clubs. These clubs outside of the English Premier League from all over the mainland Europe. And I think that's what the Super League is trying to do, is they're trying to gather support by making it more inclusive with this new proposed format. And I think it's a good move from their part to create that bargaining power. And I think it's something that will create more parity, I would say, in this proposed Super League. And that's the goal at this moment, is to gather support. And I think that's the point of this new format that was announced.
Okay, UEFA and FIFA did come out with their statements, especially the president, UEFA, Alexander Schäferin, and Gianni Infantino did come out with statement at the judgment after the ECJ made that judgment. For Andrew, FIFA did say this is going to kill football. UEFA president also did say it's a fiction, and a fantastic idea, in quote, according to him. This is FIFA's statement, but the FIFA president's statement. Andrew, is FIFA contradicting their agenda for football? We saw Infantino's support for the African Super League, that's the African Football League, but here we're having a different reaction. What could be behind the fears from UEFA and FIFA? FIFA was able to support Motsepe and the Confederation of African Football all the way for the African Football League, but do not support the European Super League. What's behind your fears?
Well, I think it's two very different cases. With the African Super League, or the African Football League, pardon me, the point is of that the creation of that competition is to try and generate additional revenue, generate more sponsorship that we don't see in competitions like the CAF Champions League, the CAF Confederation Cup. Whereas in the case of Europe and the UEFA Champions League, there's a whole lot of money being generated by these competitions already. You know, television rights, UEFA, the English Premier League, they have a lot to gain from the current system, and they make a lot of money from the current system. So they have more to lose in this case with the European Super League compared to Africa, which is with Dr. Matsepe. He's trying to generate ways to make more revenue for African football that the CAF Champions League and the interclub competitions in CAF just don't generate at this point. So I think they're two very different cases. And in the case of the Super League, the European Super League, there's just so many more obstacles to overcome. You know, you saw UEFA make their statement, and they had representatives of several parties. You know, La Liga, the European Clubs Association, FIFPro, the Players Union. They're presenting a united front against Perez and the likes of the European Super League because they don't want things to change. They benefit very well already from the system. Whereas in Africa and CAF with the African Football League, they're trying to generate new streams of revenue and new sponsorship.
Okay, new sponsorship. I'm sure that everybody would want to, find a way to where they can make a lot of money. Now, talking about money, could Saudi Arabia be a major financier of this competition? Because we hear about their interest. Yesterday, we did hear reports making the rounds that Saudi Pro League, because they had intention to make it to the Champions League, which was stopped by UEFA. But this is a chance for them. If they become a major financier for this competition, they can be part of a competition that would sweep away the Champions League. What do you think Saudi Arabia can be a major financier, Andrew?
Absolutely. Money talks in this industry, Onyechi, and Saudi Arabia's got a lot of it. We've already seen them form a partnership with CAF, and they're certainly part of this whole effort that we saw with the African Football League, and they certainly can influence things when it comes to UEFA. But it's certainly going to be a much higher obstacle because whereas in the case of the African Football League, this is meant to bring in sponsors like the Saudis. UEFA does not really need this money as much. They don't need an influx of money as much. But at the same time, the Saudi influence continues to grow, as we've seen with Newcastle United, of course. And if they're willing to put their weight behind an effort like the European Super League, by all means, they can certainly change things. They can change the perception of this. But, like I said, the UEFA Champions League, the UEFA competitions, they're so well established. They're already proven money makers. And the forces that have to be overcome for something like this to happen are much greater, and they're very united in their defiance.
Okay, so a lot of clubs came up with statement yesterday rejecting their, alliance with the European Super League. Now, with these clubs, as we see on the screen right now, what happens when the European Super League becomes a big deal? Florentino Perez goes ahead with a plan with Barcelona backing him, and we see those Turkish Super League teams joining up with French Ligue 1 based teams joining up, and it becomes a powerhouse. What happens to this team? Let's play the devil's advocate here, Andrew. What will be the tale for these teams who have rejected publicly?
Well, I believe that, this ruling that came down from the European Court of Justice, it paves the way for the possibility that we could see the Super League be approved by UEFA if it meets their criteria, of course, that they set out. And, we could see a situation where we have the Super League directly competing with the UEFA Champions League. The key for these big clubs that are on the screen there, listed on the screen, Manchester United, Manchester City, a big part of it is just the response from media, supporters. When we saw the Super League kind of come out a couple of years ago, we had big fan protests. Manchester United supporters spoke out vehemently against it. The Athletic conducted an interview of clubs across Europe, an anonymous interview, and 66% of them disapproved of the idea of the Super League. So like I said, if they can convince, if they can win hearts and minds of the supporters, these clubs, the clubs will follow and the competition will gain in prestige. But, that's the key at this moment. They have to have the supporters behind it. And once the supporters come behind it, maybe the media as well, and all these organizations, then that can pave the way for this competition to begin. But there's still just a lot of popular sentiment against the creation of a Super League. And that's where they really have to win. But legally, they can certainly do it at this point, and they certainly have the financial power to make it happen.
Okay, we'll be following up on developments from all that's coming up from this European Super League and the judgment from the ECJ. For FIFA president, he says the judgment does not hold water. It doesn't count for anything. And the UEFA president says football is not safe. We've been speaking to a Pan-African football commentator all the way from Houston, Texas, Andrew Oysen. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts concerning the ECJ judgment on the proposed European Super League. Thank you so much for joining us on In the Game.
Enjoyed the discussion. Thank you, Onyechi.
You're welcome.